So now we've got the barrel of this gun built, we want to move on to the body. Now what I'm going to do for this one, there's lots of different ways that you could make this. You could draw a curve and then use a lathe generator to sweep that round and make that shape. I'm actually going to use a different technique. I'm going to make this out of 3 cylinders, and then I'm going to use a deformer to sort of squeeze in them and sculpt them into this teardrop shape. So let's see how that works. Let's go to our create menu and create another cylinder. And again, I actually want this on the Z-axis, and I'm going to position it in the middle of this section. This ray gun's got these little notches, sort of grooves around the body of it, and I'm going to create those by having 3 filleted cylinders. So let's place this one around about here. Let's make it a little longer, change its height a little bit. Let's make the radius a little bigger. Now, my image isn't exactly lined up on the 0 axis, and what we can see here is the top of the ray gun is sort of quite well above my cylinder, and the bottom part is within it. So if I was to build it more accurately, it would probably be offset a little bit. Because I want to keep everything lined up along this axis, I'm just going to take a little bit of creative license here and build a gun that looks similar to this, but maybe not exactly the same. So here's my section of my the body of the gun here. Let's go to the caps tab, turn on the fillet, and I just want a small fillet that's going to make half of this groove here. So let's just do something kind of like that, and that's fine. So let's use the same trick we used before. Let's command drag and place this one here and adjust the height of it so it's just touching the other one. Now if we look in the perspective view, you should see there's the first one, there's the second one just touching. There's a little bit of a gap. Maybe I'll just nudge those together. And let's command drag this one more time. And let's just change the height of that one. It's too tall at the moment. Let's change that down. Something kind of like that. So there's these 3 sections all in a row. That's looking fine. Okay, so what I want to do now is use a deformer. It's called an F50 Deformer. It stands for Freeform Deformer. And what we're going to do is we're going to deform all 3 of these objects as if they're one piece. So normally with a deformer, like a bend deformer or something like that, you would create the deformer and you would make it a child of the object that you want to deform, and you'd fit it onto that, and then you would change a parameter and make it deform that way. I want to deform several objects at the same time. So the way that I do that is to select these 3 objects. I'm going to group them by pushing Option G, so they're in a group now. Now if I put a deformer in this group, all of these objects will get deformed together. So let's create the deformer, create deformer, and I want this thing called an FFD. And what it looks like is this big grid or mesh around the objects, and we need to fit it around here. Now we don't have a fit to parent option. Fit to parent doesn't work, well, it's got no parent at the moment, but even if we put it in the group, if I drag and drop that into the group, if I fit it to the parent is actually a null, and nulls have no physical size. They have a position in space, but they don't have a specific size, and the FFD doesn't know how big all these parts are. So what we do need to do is set the size of this manually. So if I select the FFD, it's got a grid size setting, and I want to change these values until this grid just fits around these 3 objects. So that looks pretty good from the side to side. That looks about right there. It's fine if it extends a little bit outside of these objects, but we don't want it inside. And let's change the length of this. And just need to drag that along that Z-axis a little, just to make sure it's covering the entire amount of these 3 cylinders. So that's looking pretty good. Okay, so our F50 Deformer, the way that it works is like a sort of a magnetic sculpting tool around an object or a collection of objects. And what we're going to use for this F50 are the components of this. When we deal with 3D modeling and animation, we deal with objects themselves, whole objects, like the cylinder for example, but every object is made up of components, and these components are the polygon faces, the edges in between them, and then there are points or vertices where the edges meet. And over on the left-hand side of our interface, we've got buttons here for switching between the different modes: points, edges, polygons, and obviously model mode, which is dealing with whole objects. So when it comes to this deformer, when we select it, we want to deal with its points, its vertices that occur where the edges meet. So if we go to points mode, we can now bring our cursor over and highlight these points, and if we move them, this deformer acts kind of like a big sort of magnet, and it pulls that area of the mesh around. And obviously different parts of the mesh, if we pull them around, we stretch and distort our mesh. So F50 Deformer is a way of moving many polygon points using a few points. It's a really handy tool. Okay, the other thing that we need to make sure before we get started is that we've got enough points or divisions on our F50 to sculpt the shape that we want. Now, I've got 3 down the length of my deformer. I probably need at least 1 more row. So before I start deforming anything, I'm going to go to my F50, and along the Z-axis I want an extra row of divisions. So let's just put more points in the Z-axis. Now you really want to try and set this before you start modeling. If you change this number after you've started with working on your F50, you can get all sorts of unexpected results. The other thing you want to do is avoid putting too many points into your F50, because the whole idea with an F50 is you're using few points to manipulate a lot of points. Quite often using these, there's a little bit of trial and error trying to figure out exactly the right amount of points. That's just the way it goes with this. So now I've got my points around my, my 3 cylinders here. What I want to do is start grabbing these rings or these rows of points, and if I scale these all up and down, I can actually shape all these points, all these cylinders. So let's see how that works. I want to select all the points on the end here for a start. So I can select this and shift select these, and I can go through and just keep selecting these. It's a little bit slow that way. What I can do is use maybe my Lasso Selection. So if I just click and hold on my selection tools, I can grab the lasso and I'm going to click and drag around that collection of points, and now I've got them all selected. Now be really careful when you're selecting that you don't accidentally grab some other points. For example, I've grabbed some in the background there. And one of the easiest ways to tell is once you've got a bunch of points selected, just check where your axis is for your Move Rotate Scale tool. If it's not lined up completely on that row, then you've got some extra points in your selection. So let me just reselect just these ones. And now there's my axis right there, so I know that's the only points I have. Now I'm going to grab my scale tool and I'm going to scale all these points down. So if I just click and drag near the center of my axis, I can scale all these points up and down. Now be careful not to scale just on one axis to start with, or to scale on the wrong axis. The Z1 will do nothing at this stage. I just want to click and scale in this empty area, which will scale all the axes down evenly. Now what I can do is, if I just minimize that view, if I have a look at the side view, I can see the black lines which indicate the edge of my cylinder. So as I scale this down in this perspective view, I can see the shape of my mesh starting to come down, and so I want to get this fairly small, and there's the line starting to extend up, the line of my Raygun Body starting to extend up there. So now that I've got these points scaled down so the end of it here looks about the right size, I can move on to this next row of points. So the easiest way to select them is to see them from side on, grab that lasso tool, and then just lasso all those points. And now if I spin around a little bit and grab my scale tool, and I'll just change this view here, I click and drag, and now I can see that black line, the outline of my rocket. And I'm just going to scale that down, something kind of like that. And I'm going to repeat this process. Let's go to the next row of points. And let's scale these ones down. Now, again, this is where I said I'll have a little bit of artistic license with my model because I'm slightly misaligned compared to the image. But looking at the result of my F50, I'm just going to sort of make something that's pretty similar to the ray gun in the picture. So that's that row there done. Let's click and drag on this final row of points, And let's scale those down. And now what's happened here is I've scaled these points down, but my other part of the body here is really sort of sucked right into the middle of the ray gun. It really isn't wide enough. So what I need to do is come back to this row of points here, select these ones, and actually scale them up. So I'm really pushing that the shape of those cylinders outwards. So let's scale that up, and now we can really see there's the outline of my ray gun there, and something like that is pretty close. As I said, it doesn't match up exactly with my picture, but that's definitely starting to look like the kind of shape that I'm after. I'm just going to be happy with that. I'm going to go with that for now, and we'll move on to the next parts. But before I do that, let's just go back to model mode. I finished dealing with the points on this deformer, so I'm going to go back to model mode now. Now, if we have a look at this, the shape of that, I'm pretty happy with the shape. It looks good. But we've got the same issue again, where if we have a look around the edge of this, it's quite angular again. We don't have very many points around our cylinders. So I'll do the same trick I did with these ones. Let's select those 3 cylinders, and let's set the rotation segments to 48. We might as well match the other divisions that we had in these cylinders here. And if you look at this, you can actually trace one of these division lines right from the front cylinder there, and they match up all the way down, which is actually a pretty good thing to do when you're modeling, to have a really nice regular mesh of polygons. If you need to deform your mesh, it's going to create really smooth deformations. If you're going to maybe convert this to an editable mesh in the future and do some poly modeling, then you've got really nice clean lines that run along the length of it. So it's a good idea to try and keep the same sort of amount of divisions along a model if you can. Okay, the other thing I'll do is add some divisions along the length of these because they look a little bit angular and not quite smooth enough. So let's go to this first cylinder, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to add more height segments, and what I'm going to try and get is the polygons to be roughly square shaped. So I'll put in something like that. What's that? 14 divisions, and these are pretty much general. They're generally a regular square shape, which is always a good thing in a polygon model. So for the next cylinder, let's aim to do the same for that. Let's put more divisions in, and I want them to be about the same size as these ones. So that's 11 there. This one won't need quite so many. That's looking pretty good. Okay, so that's the body of the ray gun done, and I'm happy with that.